Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 7 p.m. showing of our Electric Vehicles 101 webinar. It's just a little after the hour, so I will go ahead and get started to make sure we're all done by 8 o'clock. So my name is Anna Vanderspek. I am the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. For those of you who are not familiar with Green Energy Consumers, we are a nonprofit organization with normally one office in Boston and one office in Providence. Right now we have many different offices scattered across the 2 states. But our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. What that means is that we have a series of programs and services that help consumers make smart energy choices for their lives and also for the environment. And then we take the experience that we learn or gain from running those consumer-facing programs to influence the advocacy work that we do at the local and state level. A couple years ago, we launched an electric vehicle program called Drive Green, which I'll talk about more later in this presentation, but that's why we're here to talk to you about electric vehicles today. Before I launch into the actual content, just a couple of logistics. Everyone is muted to avoid background noise, but there are regular breaks built into the presentation to go over questions. So as questions come up, please do go ahead and type them right into the chat function, and I will get to them in those regular pauses. And with that, I will go ahead. So the first part of this presentation goes over why electric vehicles are a good idea. We'll start with sort of a big picture societal standpoint and then narrow down to the consumer. The first reason that we at Green Energy Consumers Alliance got involved with electric vehicles are the environmental benefits. So many people think that electric cars are just as dirty as gas-powered cars because there's so much coal on our grid. And that's really not true, particularly not in New England. We're actually at a point now where transportation has overtaken electricity generation in terms of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And our grid is clean enough that switching from a gas-powered car to an electric vehicle makes a really big difference. To highlight that, we've taken some data from the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have a great tool called the EV Emissions Tool that you can look up online. And you can plug in any zip code in the whole country, and they'll show you the comparative emissions of a gas-powered car to a plug-in hybrid or a battery electric vehicle, taking into account specifically what electricity generators are hooked up to the grid in that area. So the data here is for all of New England because the New England states share one electric grid. And you can go to the Union of Concerned Scientists to play with this tool yourself. But if you're looking at the average gas-powered car, right now that car emits 381 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. If you have a plug-in hybrid, which is a vehicle that has an onboard battery that you can charge by plugging the car into a wall outlet, as well as a backup gas tank, you can reduce your emissions to 181 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. And that is cutting your emissions in half right there, which is really quite incredible. Nowhere else in your life can you as easily cut your emissions in half just by switching out one technology. If you go one step further and go all the way to a battery electric vehicle, so this is a car, basically a battery and a computer on wheels, no gas tank at all, you can reduce your emissions all the way down to 102 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile, which is a reduction of about 3/4. And then, quick shameless plug for one of our other programs. We have a program called Green Powered, where you can choose local renewable energy for your electricity. And if you do that and choose 100% local renewable energy and then charge your car at home, you can charge your car with wind power, which we think, of course, is particularly exciting. Along with those environmental or climate benefits come a whole slew of public health benefits that we also think are underappreciated in general. So an electric vehicle that's running just on electricity has no tailpipe emissions. A plug-in hybrid, if it's running on gas, will have tailpipe emissions, but they'll be less than a comparable traditional gas-powered car. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, even if you take into account how that electricity is generated, the fuel is still cleaner. But when a gas-powered car drives down the street, it's not only emitting carbon dioxide, it's emitting NOx and SOx and particulate matter, and creating ground-level ozone. All of these things are things that harm our health, obviously particularly our lungs, but also our hearts and our brains. And that's causing real suffering all across the country every day. The American Lung Association did a study in 2016 where they looked at the 10 states that at the time had a mandate or a target of some sort for electric vehicle adoption. And they tried to calculate what the costs of burning gasoline for transportation were in the public health sector. So how much money are we paying in healthcare costs every year because we're burning gasoline for burning gasoline for transportation. And they found that the costs of that are on the tens of billions of dollars per year. And this was only in those 10 states that they studied. So as we transition from gas-powered cars to electric vehicles and also electric buses and trains and all modes of transport, that local harmful air pollution comes down, the costs in the healthcare system come down, but also more importantly, the human suffering comes down. So this is yet another reason why we are big advocates for electric vehicles. One point that's also worth highlighting is that climate change itself is a public health threat. As the globe warms, we see vector-borne diseases that are carried by things like mosquitoes and ticks expanding their range. Natural disasters are huge public health threats. So there are lots of excellent reasons, if you think about just human health, why electric vehicles are a better choice than gas-powered cars. Often we get asked why. Why are they so much better? And the answer is efficiency. So gas-powered cars that run on internal combustion engines, which is the technology we've been working on for over 100 years, at this point only convert about 20% of the energy stored in 1 gallon of gasoline into motion. That means 80% of the energy in every gallon of gasoline is wasted, and that's mostly going to friction and heat. That's quite honestly kind of sad, considering we've been working on this for so long, and it's also just a huge source of waste. Electric vehicles are closer to 60, 70, 80% efficient, which just means if we're taking all this energy or producing all this energy, that more of it is actually getting translated into motion and less of it is getting lost. One way to think about this in an apples to apples kind of way is to compare the miles per gallon of some popular cars with the miles per gallon electric. The miles per gallon electric is a measure of how far an electric vehicle will go on the amount of energy that is stored in 1 gallon of gasoline, which is 33.7 kilowatt hours. So you can see that on the far right, we've got some normal popular gas-powered cars that get somewhere between 18 and 30 miles per gallon. The traditional hybrids like the Toyota Prius and the Hyundai Sonata get somewhere between 40 and 50. There's a huge jump with the plug-in hybrids getting anywhere from 70 to 130. But it's the all-electric vehicles on the left that blow everybody else out of the water in terms of efficiency. And that efficiency gets translated into those public health and environmental benefits that I just mentioned. Moving now from the big picture of why electric vehicles are good for society, we'll talk a little bit more about why electric vehicles are good for consumers. And the first thing is that electric vehicles have lower fuel costs than gas-powered cars. I recognize that right now is a particularly interesting time to be talking about lower fuel costs because gas prices have plummeted so much in the past couple of weeks. But I put kind of two ways of thinking about this up on this slide to give you a general sense. So on the left, we regularly do our own math to try and calculate how much it will cost an electric vehicle driver to drive an EV in Massachusetts or Rhode Island and then compare that to the average gas-powered car. We take average fuel efficiencies from the EPA, average gas prices from the Department of Energy. We publish our methodology on the website, so if you want to play around with the numbers and check our math, you're welcome to. But the last time we did this was in February, right before everything got completely crazy, and we found that the average driver would save around 4.7 cents per mile driven in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. For most people, that amounts to about $47 a month or $560 per year. We are pretty comfortable with that math because it compares well with the Union of Concerned Scientists estimate. They released estimates for the whole country recently, and that came out to $770 of fuel savings per year. That's higher than our estimate, but that makes sense because we have higher electricity costs in this region than most of the rest of the country. And we're particularly comfortable because the Union of Concerned Scientists estimate for Boston came out to $558 per year, which is very, very close to our $560. So again, if you want to get a sense of, in normal times, when gas prices are normal, how that works out, we've got that math on our website. But I also took a screenshot from the Department of Energy's eGallon tool just yesterday to get you a sort of more current sense of this. So the Department of Energy publishes an eGallon every day. So you can go to their link, type in any state in the country, and they will show you the average gas price and the average eGallon price for your state. So the eGallon is their measure of how much you would need to pay in electricity, given electricity costs in your state, to get you the same distance that a gallon of gasoline would get you in a gas-powered car. Obviously, there are a bunch of assumptions going into that math, and I would encourage you to go to the eGallon website to look at their methodology if you're interested. But this just goes to show that even with our low gas prices right now, the eGallon comes out cheaper. One thing I also want to highlight here is that even if the gas price and the electric were the same, gas prices have historically fluctuated wildly, and electricity prices historically do not. So there's a sense of stability when you're fueling your vehicle with electricity that you know the costs are not going to vary wildly, and that's a sense of security we don't have with gas prices, particularly right now with everything going on all these directions. So that's one thing to think about as you're trying to make sense of this particular aspect of owning an EV at this time. The second way that EVs really benefit drivers financially is in reduced maintenance costs. So an internal combustion engine is a piece of machinery with tons of different moving parts that can break or corrode or rust or otherwise need to be replaced. There are many fewer moving parts in an electric vehicle, particularly a pure electric vehicle. The battery, motor, and electronics themselves require little maintenance. There's fewer fluids. And then there are technologies like regenerative braking that protect those parts that do need to be replaced every now and then. Regenerative braking, if you're not familiar with it, is a technology where if you take your foot off of the accelerator in an electric vehicle, it will slow down faster than a comparable gas-powered car might. And that's because the car is smart enough to recognize that you're taking your foot off of the accelerator. That must mean that you need to slow down. So it will start slowing you down basically by using magnets and slowing down the wheels that way and capturing that energy and putting it back into the battery rather than forcing you to rely on friction brakes. What that means is, one, your range is extended because you're taking energy that would have otherwise been lost to friction and instead putting it right back into the battery. And it also protects your brakes because you don't have to use the friction brakes as frequently or as hard, which means you just have to replace them less frequently. A third point is that it's a much more pleasant driving experience, particularly if you are in stop-and-go traffic. You can simply ease up on the accelerator and come to a complete stop without having to constantly move your foot from the accelerator to the brake and back again, which doesn't sound like it's a difficult thing, but once you've gotten used to not having to do it, you realize how annoying it was to have to do it in the first place. We'll talk a little bit about numbers in another slide or two. But the last thing I want to talk about from the consumer perspective are the upfront costs. So we've talked about fuel costs, we've talked about maintenance. What's left is the upfront costs. There are a couple of different layers of incentives available to consumers to bring those upfront costs down. So I'll start at the top here. The first is that there is a federal tax credit for the purchase of electric vehicles, and it is up to $7,500. I say up to for a couple of reasons. First, it depends on the battery size of the car. So if we're talking about one of the all-electric vehicles that gets over 200 miles of range, that'll definitely qualify for the full $7,500 federal tax credit. But the Toyota Prius Prime, for example, which is a plug-in hybrid with a slightly smaller battery, will only qualify for about $4,500. We have all the numbers up on our website, so you can check them out there. But that firstly does vary by car. Then the second point is that how much you can claim depends on your personal tax liability. If you don't owe $7,500 in taxes federally, you cannot carry the difference over from one year to the next, and the IRS will unfortunately not write you a check for the difference. So that is one thing to keep in mind. One way to get around that is to lease a vehicle. If you lease, the federal tax credit goes to the leasing agent, basically the dealer's bank. And most of the manufacturers have made the decision to pass the value of that federal tax credit onto the consumer in the form of lower monthly payments. So that's one reason why lots of people who might have otherwise not really thought about leasing a car are leasing an electric vehicle. The last thing you should know about the federal tax credit is that it was set up to jumpstart the electric vehicle market and then kind of fade into the background once it had taken hold. And when legislators set this up, they decided that the sort of tipping point for that would be 200,000 units. So once a manufacturer had sold 200,000 electric cars in the United States, the federal tax credit would start phasing out in a slightly delayed 6-month cycle. So far, the only manufacturers that have hit that mark are Tesla and GM, and they have both completed the phase out. So neither of them qualifies for any federal tax credit at this point. All of the other manufacturers are still a ways away from hitting that 200,000 unit limit. We pay close attention to this and write on our website and email folks when we think a manufacturer might get close to hitting that limit. But for now, federal tax credit is safe for all the other manufacturers. Moving one step down, if you live in Massachusetts, there is a state rebate available to you for the purchase or lease of an electric car. It's called More EV, and the way it works is that once you've purchased or leased a vehicle, you go to moreev.org and fill out their online application, and then a couple weeks or months later, you receive a check in the mail. For battery electric vehicles, the amount is $2,500 as long as the final sales price of the car is under $50,000. For plug-in hybrids, it's $1,500 as long as it's under $50,000 and has at least 25 miles of electric range. Rhode Island used to have a state rebate. It ran out of funding a couple of years ago and has not been replenished since. It has been one of our advocacy priorities for a long time in Rhode Island to get that rebate refunded, but unfortunately so far without success. But the More EV rebate is available to Massachusetts residents only. Taking one step further, the third level of incentive or discount is the Drive Green program. So I will go into the program itself in more detail later, but very basically, we have built up a network of dealers across Massachusetts and Rhode Island who offer fixed discounts on electric vehicles on a monthly basis. So at the beginning of every month, all of our dealers post fixed prices for Drive Green participants on our website, and you, the consumer, can come compare cars, compare dealers, and sign up to test drive and get put in touch with the dealerships that you chose. So you can then, when you purchase the vehicle, get the Drive Green discount. If you're a Massachusetts resident, go home, fill out the application, get that check in the mail, and then when it comes time to do your taxes, apply for the federal tax credit and sort of stack these different incentives on top of each other. To give you a sense about how all of these parts sort of fit together, we have prepared a simplified total cost of ownership analysis for the Toyota RAV4, which is a super popular gas-powered car right now, and comparing it to the Hyundai Kona EV, which is an all-electric SUV that's about the same size as the RAV4, and then also the Nissan Leaf Plus, which is a popular sedan option. I am calling this a simplified total cost of ownership because we're really just looking at the upfront costs, the fuel costs, and the maintenance costs. We're not looking at things like depreciation or taxes or financing or insurance or any of that. It's really just a way to tie together all the things that we've talked about over the previous slide. So if we start at the top, if we were to just look at the MSRP for each of these cars, it would look like the Toyota RAV4 is the most expensive option. The least expensive option. It starts at $25,000. The Kona and the Nissan Leaf are around 26 or 28, but that's before you take into account the incentives that are available. So both the Nissan Leaf and the Hyundai Kona qualify for the full $7,500 federal tax credit. The Nissan Leaf Plus has a $2,500 rebate available for National Grid and Eversource electricity customers. And the Hyundai Kona EV right now, the biggest drive green discount from one of our dealers is $1,000. So if you do that math out, you see that already the upfront costs are pretty much close to each other, $25,000, $28,000, $26,000. But that's before we take into account the cost to actually run these cars for a couple of years. So moving down to the fourth row, we calculated the energy costs for each of these cars, assuming that you drive 15,000 miles in a year. So for the two electric cars, we took 15,000 miles, multiplied that by an efficiency figure, so how many kilowatt hours that particular car requires to drive 100 miles. And that's a figure that we took from the EPA for each car. And then multiplied that by the average cost of electricity across Massachusetts and Rhode Island, which is somewhere around 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So for those two cars, the annual fuel costs come out to $930 or $810. For the Toyota RAV4, we took the same 15,000 miles, divided by the efficiency, so the miles per gallon, and then multiplied by what was, at the time we made this, the average gas price in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, $2.55. And doing that math out comes out to $1,400. So already you can see a couple $100 of savings choosing the electric vehicle over the gas-powered car. The next step is maintenance costs. So the figures that we're using here come from a study from AAA. They looked at maintenance costs across different classes of vehicles and found that for SUVs, gas-powered SUVs, maintenance costs are about 9.6 cents per mile driven, and that for electric vehicles, it was 6.6 cents per mile driven. We're using these figures because AAA is a reputable source that a lot of people recognize, and it's one of the few studies that sort of compares things apples to apples. However, I will say that we think that these estimates are really conservative in the sense that for the electric vehicle, the estimates are too high. When we've given this presentation to electric vehicle owners, often they laugh when they see this number because they have had no maintenance costs over the past couple of years. And the next slide will show some more data about why that $990 is a little bit high. But for the sake of comparison, we'll use it. So basically for the EV and for the Toyota RAV4, we just multiply 15,000 miles by that cents per mile number from AAA and came out to $990 for the two EVs, and again, $1,400 for the Toyota RAV4. And then to get a total cost of ownership after 5 years, we just took the upfront cost, added 5 times the annual fuel cost, and then added 5 times the annual maintenance cost. And you can see that at the end of this, the Nissan Leaf and the Hyundai Kona definitely win out over the Toyota RAV4. For all the Massachusetts residents on the call, I would note that for you, the total cost of ownership after 5 years is another $2,500 cheaper because you qualify for the state more EV rebate. But because we have Rhode Islanders on the call too, we wanted to keep this slide state neutral. But either way, the EV wins out over the gas-powered car. So I mentioned that those annual maintenance costs of $990 seemed a little high to us. This is one of the reasons why. New York City has a massive fleet of vehicles, and in 2019 they released their maintenance figures for 2018. And you can see that the two electric vehicles, Chevy Bolt and the Ford Focus Electric, had much lower maintenance costs than the comparable gas-powered cars, and also had maintenance costs that are much lower than what we showed on that previous slide using the AAA data. So 204 or 386 is a lot less than 990. So this is just one of the other reasons, beyond just talking to lots of electric vehicle owners, that we feel comfortable saying that those estimates from AAA are probably a little high. And lastly, electric vehicles are a lot of fun to drive. They are a much smoother driving experience than gas-powered cars. They're much quieter. They react much more quickly. They've got great torque. And also they have all sorts of fancy newfangled features that people love, whether that's Apple CarPlay or lane assist, lane departure assist, all sorts of things that people love. We regularly survey folks who have gotten cars through our program, and we always ask, would you recommend the car that you got to a friend or neighbor? And so far, 100% of the respondents have always said, yes, I would absolutely recommend this to a friend or neighbor. If you're interested in hearing directly from some EV owners, we have a couple of webinars coming up in May where we'll have a panel of electric vehicle owners just answering questions and talking about their experience, so you can definitely learn more there. But they definitely are fun to drive, and if you haven't had a chance to test drive, next time you get one, you should definitely take it. So with that, I will come to our first pause and see if I've gotten any questions before I continue. So there's one question about whether the 60 or 70% efficiency of EVs includes just the efficiency in driving the car and discharging the battery, or the efficiency from the point of generation through transmission. It's just in driving the car and discharging the battery. So yes, we recognize that there are losses in the process of transmitting electricity from generators to the end users, but that analysis was, strictly speaking, just the vehicle. I'd be really interested actually to see one that compares the system losses for electric vehicles with the system losses that exist in the gas distribution network that we just don't see. And I'll poke around and see if I can find something along those lines, but so far I haven't. There's another question about 20 cents per kilowatt hour being the average price of electricity in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So yes, at least for National Grid and Eversource customers over the past couple of years, that's generally where electricity costs have been around. We are not just thinking about supply, we're thinking about supply and distribution and transmission. Again, if you want to play around with the math, we have the methodology document on our website, but we're pretty comfortable with that estimate. There are municipal utilities in Massachusetts that have much lower electricity costs, but most people in Massachusetts are served by either National Grid or Eversource. That looks like all the questions for now, so I'll keep going, but we'll have another couple of breaks if you have any more. So, things you should know. The first thing you should know is that range anxiety is a thing of the past. So range anxiety is a term for the fear that if you're driving an electric car, you're going to suddenly run out of charge in the middle of a highway and get stuck. And this really doesn't happen for a couple of reasons. The first is that the car manufacturers know that that is one of your greatest fears, so they have done everything they can to make sure that never happens. And what I mean by that is that there is a big screen right in front of you at all times telling you how much charge you have left, about how many miles you can keep going before you absolutely need to charge. And the manufacturers have invested in creating some pretty sophisticated software that's taking into account things like the temperature, because batteries operate more or less efficiently depending on the temperature, and also taking into account things like how you drive. So if your car has learned that you are an aggressive driver who accelerates needlessly and then stomps down on the brake a lot and wastes a lot of energy that way, it will recognize that that means you're going to not go quite as far for every kilowatt hour of energy you have stored, and it'll adjust your estimated range down. So you're never going to suddenly realize that you only have 5 miles of range left, because the car is displaying to you at all times how much range you have left. The second thing is that most electric vehicles that are on the market today have ranges that far surpass what most people drive in a day. So the average Massachusetts or Rhode Island resident drives somewhere between 30 and 50 miles per day. Most of the all-electric vehicles that consumers are going for today have over 200 miles of range. And then there are still excellent plug-in hybrids available, where there's a battery that can cover most of your daily driving, so somewhere between 20 or 50 miles of range on electricity. But then there is a backup gas tank if you're really worried about running out of charge or regularly make really long road trips. So we totally understand that people are nervous about this, but there really are lots of options, and probably one that works for you. Speaking of charging, charging is not as hard as a lot of people think, but it's definitely one of the questions that we get most often when we talk to people about electric cars. You should know that there are 3 basic levels of charging. The first is called level 1, and it's when you take the cord that comes with a car and plug it into a normal 110 or 120 volt outlet, the same type of outlet you would plug your cell phone into. This is the slowest type of charge. It's also called a trickle charge, and it adds about 4 miles of range per hour spent charging. That sounds really slow, but one thing that we found is that it's actually plenty for a lot of people. So if you drive around 40 miles a day and you're able to charge at home, you can replenish what you've used up in a day overnight on a level 1 charge. Doing 10 hours of 4 miles per hour will get you 40 miles. And so a lot of people are actually relying on level 1, who at first were nervous that it might be too slow. Some people do want to be able to charge faster or drive a lot more every day, and for those, level 2 charging station might be a good idea. So this is a unit that uses a 240 volt outlet, which is what you might also have for an all-electric dryer, for example. And it can add 10 to 25 miles of range per hour spent charging. So at home, what this means is you can purchase one of these units online or at a home improvement store. And then you just need an electrician to make sure that you've got a 240 volt line where you need it, and then to actually install the unit. And all of that costs a couple of $100, really depending on how many bells and whistles you want on your charging unit. But level 2 is also the type of charging stations you might see at a supermarket or a library or at a town hall. Most of the public charging that's available is level 2, but we'll talk about public charging in just a little bit as well. The third level of charging is DC fast charging. The DC stands for direct current. And this is the closest that we are right now to the experience of going to a gas station. So these are super high-powered stations, not something you would install in your home, but something you'll find increasingly at rest stops along highways and major travel corridors. The speed at which you can DC fast charge depends on the charger and on the car. But the Chevy Bolt, as an example, can get 90 miles of range in 30 minutes of charging on a DC fast charger. Some of the Teslas can get well over 100 miles in 30 minutes. But this is the type of charging that you really would only use if you're going on a road trip or traveling several hundred miles in a day. Otherwise, most people rely on level 1 or level 2 for most of their daily charging. In terms of plug types, the first thing you should know is that Tesla has its own proprietary charging port and charging network. So you can only use a Tesla charging station with a Tesla, and if you have a Tesla, you can only use a Tesla charging station. Everybody else uses the same standard for level 1 and level 2 charging, and that's the J1772 port you see in the top right-hand corner. So no matter what other car you use, level 1 or level 2 will use this port. Tesla does sell an adapter for Tesla drivers, so if you're a Tesla driver and you'd like to use a J1772, you can buy this adapter. but there's no adapter in the other direction. So a non-Tesla driver can never use a Tesla charging station. The only place where it gets slightly tricky is for DC fast charging, where the industry has split. So Tesla, again, has their proprietary port. Everybody else uses either the SAE combo or the CHAdeMO. American and European manufacturers use the SAE combo. Asian manufacturers use the CHAdeMO. So this is an unfortunate split in the industry, but the good news is that most DC fast charging stations have a cord for each plug type. So it's very, very rare that you'll pull up to a DC fast charging station and not be able to use it because you don't have the right port. The only time that that really happens is if you're pulling up to a DC fast charging station that's at a car dealership. That car dealership will likely have only installed the plug type for the cars that it sells. But particularly the stations being put all over the country by Electrify America, which is a company that came out of the Volkswagen scandal. All of those have both SAE combo and CHAdeMO plugs. So if you're going on a trip, it's good to double check that the station you want to stop at has what you need, but most of them have both. So I mentioned that a lot of people do install a level 2 charging station at home. And we wrote a guide called Installing Electric Vehicle Charging at Home to help walk you through, whether that is something you would need, whether you already have an electric car and you're thinking about installing charging, or you're just trying to think, can I even charge at home if I were to get an electric car? This guide is intended to help walk you through the questions you should ask yourself to figure out what would be right for your situation. And it also points to a couple of guides about different units that you can purchase and questions you should ask your electrician and things like that. So I definitely encourage you to check that out and then let us know if you have any questions. So there's a lot more charging available publicly than most people realize. It is definitely possible to do a long road trip in an electric vehicle. We recently had one of our EV ambassadors drive from Massachusetts all the way to California and back in a non-Tesla all-electric vehicle, and he wrote up a lovely blog post about his experience. So it's definitely possible. The resource that we would point you to is called PlugShare. And we like PlugShare because it is technology and platform neutral. So there are a lot of different companies competing in this space right now, building out networks of charging stations. And so, for example, if you go to ChargePoint, which is one of the larger players in this space, you can see all of the ChargePoint charging stations. And then if you go to EVgo, one of their competitors, you can see all of their charging stations. But the beauty of PlugShare is that all of the charging stations are on one map. So you can type in any address in the country and it'll show you what the charging stations are in that area. You can sort and filter by different characteristics to customize it to your car. But we just put up a couple of screenshots here to show you what's available in Massachusetts and also Rhode Island on the next slide. All of the orange markers here are DC fast charging stations, and the green ones are level 2 charging stations. The beauty of PlugShare is that it's crowdsourced, so people can leave comments or photos or reviews of the different charging stations, and you can also plan a trip using the tool by putting in a starting point and an end point and saying how far you'd be willing to drive off of your driving route to charge, and it'll show you what's available along the way. I would definitely recommend that you go to the website yourself because the further you zoom in, the more of these little charging stations pop up. But one thing you should know is that the number of charging stations available is just growing all the time, both because those companies that are building out those networks are investing in this space to build out their networks, but the utilities in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island have realized that they have a role to play in this build out and are supporting businesses and multi-unit dwellings and public institutions in the build out of charging stations as well. So there's plenty there right now, but more is coming soon as well. I will pause again to see if there are any questions before I jump into how to get an electric vehicle if you're interested. Okay, actually looks like there aren't any questions, so I will just move right along. But again, feel free to write in questions if you do have any. So, how to get an electric vehicle. We will shamelessly point you to our program, which is called Drive Green. As I mentioned, we launched the program in 2016 and have built up this network of car dealers. For new vehicles, we ask for fixed discounts, which I'll show you on the website in just a moment. But we also wanted to highlight that we've recently, or relatively recently, launched a pre-owned version of the program. So on the new side, you can look for cars and sort by discount. On the pre-owned side, we're not requiring discounts from our dealers, but you can compare different vehicles from different dealerships, all of which are plug-ins, either plug-in hybrids or all-electric vehicles. And we put up as many details as we can get from the dealership so that you can really compare, okay, is this 2013 Chevy Volt in Worcester a better fit for me, or should I check out this other Volt that's in Springfield? So I will actually go right ahead and show you our website in real time to explain a little bit how this works. So this is greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen. The first thing you should know is that all of the topics that I just touched on in this presentation so far have full pages. So if you want to dig into any of that content, there's information there. But you can also call us or email us or even chat with us during business hours if you do have any questions. But when you're ready and you want to actually take a look at the cars, you can click this Explore the Cars and Sign Up for Discounts button. And so for now, I'll say I'm interested in new cars, and I'll say Massachusetts so that we get the Massachusetts state rebate information. But once I hit Browse, we come to a page that shows all of the cars that are generally available in New England right now that are electric vehicles. For each one, we've put up some of the fast facts. So what type of car is it? What's the electric range? What's the efficiency? Does it have DC fast charging? What's the federal tax credit? Information like that. So you can sort and filter by different characteristics to narrow down your choices. So say you want a battery electric vehicle that's over 200 miles of range, you can check off those boxes and it'll show you cars that meet those criteria. You can also go directly to the manufacturer's website if you want to learn more about different packages or color options or things like that. But basically, when you're ready, you can select the cars you're interested in and move along in the form. So here we'll show you the different trims that are available, so the different packages basically, and you can check off all of them or you can check off just one of them. But then you hit See Your Deals, and this is where you can see which dealerships are participating in the program and what their current offers are. So we put them all in the same format so that you can compare as apples to apples as we can get it. And so for example, for the Chevy Bolt, we have a couple of deals that end at the end of April or at the beginning of May. As I mentioned earlier, the dealers update their prices at the beginning of every month. So if you check back next week, you'll see the prices for May. But for each deal, we show the price before discount, that particular dealer's current Drive Green discount, the state rebate, the federal tax credit, and then the final price. So the final price is simply the price before discount minus the Drive Green discount, minus the state rebate, minus the federal tax credit. We also put up as much information as we can glean from the dealers about additional benefits or lease information. So basically, you can come here, you can peruse the different deals, check off which ones you're interested in, and then complete the sign-up form. It's particularly important that you put in your contact information here and hit Finish Up, because this is the only way that we can prove to the dealerships that you're a participant in the program. And it's also how you get confirmation from us that we've let the dealership know. So when you hit Finish Up, you can expect an email from us that says, thank you so much. You signed up for these 2 cars at these 2 dealerships. Here are the specific salespeople you should ask for and their phone numbers so that you can get put in touch with people who really know about these cars and the program discount. From there, it's between you and the dealership to figure out if you actually do want to purchase or lease. that we at Green Energy Consumers are always available if you run into any issues or have any questions. We're happy to help. I do want to acknowledge that we are in a particularly strange time right now. In Massachusetts and Rhode Island, the service departments of car dealerships are considered essential and are open, but the sales departments are not considered essential. Some of the car dealerships that are usually in our program have just closed their sales departments. Others have been open with limited hours, and others have decided to do online sales and drive the vehicles to you to test drive at home or things like that. So we understand it is a strange time to be thinking about purchasing a vehicle, but we do encourage you to check out what's available, sign up if you're interested, and just start the conversation with the dealership to learn more about the car, and then move forward when you feel comfortable and safe doing so. So with that, I will return to our presentation here, which is basically done. So we would love for you to join us either by going to that form, learning more on our website, signing up to test drive. We also have a couple more webinars coming up, so if you want to do a deeper dive into any of this, next week we have a deep dive into charging. So if you want to get more information and a kind of a walk through that guide to installing charging at home that I mentioned earlier, that's next week. You could sign up on the events page on our website. And then in May, we will have 2 sessions of Ask an EV Owner, where we'll have a virtual panel of EV owners with a nice variety of different cars, where you can ask questions about their experience and hear directly from them. And then lastly, if you do happen to already have an electric vehicle, we would love for you to become an EV ambassador, which just means you'll sign up to get notified by us when we have an event in your area, whenever we can have in-person events again, to come show off your car and talk to people who are thinking about going electric. So with that, I'll finish up. My contact information is up there. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. But I'll just quickly check if there are any questions. And it looks like there aren't. So thank you very much for joining me this evening. I'll hang out for another minute to see if any questions pop up. But otherwise, I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening and stay safe. Bye.